Welcome back. It is time now for us to shift gears a little bit and talk about the syllabus of stylistic techniques. Now, this can be found in your binder on the next to last tab, Stylistic Techniques. So go ahead and turn there right now. And here you will see all of the material pertaining to the style elements. You will see the little mini posters there on the right. And if you flip over to page 171, you'll see this master list of style techniques, noticing that they are divided into 4 categories: dress-ups, sentence openers, decorations, and triples. And then we have a few advanced secret techniques for the students who need the secret weapons, and you can pull those out. Now, there are a few things about these stylistic techniques that are so important, so vital for you to understand. I feel like I could just say it 10 times and drive it into your mind. But even then, it might not be enough because you'd get bored of hearing the same thing 10 times. But they're so very important, I want to start by having you understand that these 2 things are the most important thing. And I want you to write them down in your own words and keep them in mind whenever we're talking about stylistic techniques. Okay? Are you ready? Okay. Thing number 1. I do not believe, nor do I teach, that this is the formula for good writing. Keywords. Not formula. Good writing. Right? I do not believe, nor do I teach, that every paragraph, in order to be good, should have all 5 dress-ups, a variety of sentence openers, a decoration, and a triple, and if it doesn't have that, it's not good. I don't believe that. I don't teach that. So please don't misunderstand or misrepresent me and say, well, that Pudawa guy says that in order for a paragraph to be good, it has to have all this stuff in it. Okay? That's not what I teach. But that being said, I do require all of the students to do everything I have taught them in every paragraph they write, with very few exceptions, until one of 2 things happens. So that's a little bit of a paradox there. If I don't think it's what makes good writing, why would I make everybody do it in every paragraph they write? What do you think? Practice. Mastery. Right? It's a technical approach to teaching a skill. Now, my background, my primary professional training, is as a violin teacher. I lived in Japan and studied with Dr. Shinichi Suzuki of Suzuki Method for 3 years, and I spent the first 15 years of my adult life teaching violin full-time. So I see the world through the eyes of a music teacher, and I understand a technical approach to teaching a skill. Now, many of you who's played a musical instrument or has kids playing, right? So you know that when you learn a musical instrument, you do things like scales, etudes, exercises, play the same 2 measures 100 times a day. Why do you do that? Not so that you can go and play scales, etudes, and the same 2 measures 100 times, on stage at the talent show. The reason you do that is so that you will develop the skill to be able to do what you want to do when you need to do it. So if you play a nice 3-octave G major scale 1,000 times, then when you hit the Mozart G major concerto and you have a big chunk of that scale, it's easy because you've already prepared the technique. Do you see? So what we're doing here with these stylistic techniques is we're gradually building up a repertoire of specific word usages, specific grammatical constructions, specific literary devices, and we force the kids to do it, not because we want their writing to instantly be better, but because we want them to be better writers. Does that make sense? So if students grumble, maybe you will grumble during the practicum today, and you'll say, I could write a much better paragraph if I didn't have to put in all this stuff, right? Well, maybe that's true, The goal is not for you to write the best possible paragraph you could write. The goal is for you to learn the skills that will ultimately make you a better writer. So, is that pretty clear? You understand that. The purpose is to create the skill, and it's a technical approach. And so it seems a little constraining to some people, but it's a good discipline. And I said that I would require students to do something in every paragraph of everything they write, with very few exceptions, until one of two things happens. The first thing that could happen, and is the more likely, is they leave my control. They either go off to a different school or get a different teacher, or they just stop listening to me, right? And so then we're done. And what I've taught, what they've learned. They can now use or not use the skills they've learned to whatever degree they're able. And I'm done, right? And that's usually what happens. The other thing that can happen, which is the more exciting of the two, is when the student becomes so skilled at doing the checklist, they can do everything on that checklist and make it sound pretty good, and it's pretty easy. They've accomplished the goal. They graduate from the checklist. And you say, you know what? Because you can follow all these rules and do all these things according to this system, you've mastered it, you're free from it. Now go and use or not use appropriately all these techniques you've learned. And that's when it becomes very exciting, because that's when you see students start to really develop, in the popular term, their own voice. They can use the combination and permutation of techniques and come up with a more unique or individual way of doing something. One of the criticisms of this approach is that if everyone used the same checklist, everyone would sound the same. And that wouldn't be good, because we're all different. But what I've seen is that actually the checklist isn't the objective, it's the means to the end of greater skill, mastery, and the result of skill and mastery is improved creativity. Do you see? So, that was thing number one. This is not the formula for good writing or perfect writing. The checklist purpose is to develop skills in the writer. I had a woman come to my seminar one time who had spent her entire life as a professional writer and editor, and she had, as a kind of late life career, gone into teaching high school English. She was nominated for a Pulitzer. She was top of the crop, right? And she came to my seminar, and after this session, she said, this is amazing. I've always known how to write well, but I've never known how to explain that to anyone. But now I see all the elements that I naturally do. And I was talking with Joanne at the break, how is it that you, Andrew Pudawa, who didn't like writing, are now a, teacher of writing teachers? How did this happen? And I said, very often you find in the world people who aren't naturally good at something become good teachers of it because they had to learn how to do it. When you have the curse of knowledge or the natural ability, sometimes it's hard to relate to people who don't have that natural ability. And so I think that this will give you, whether you are a great writer and experienced in this, or maybe you kind of dislike writing. You're here a little bit hesitantly because you didn't do well in school. I think you will discover that this list of techniques will help you see what you do that is good and also expand your repertoire of things that you can try out. And I do expect a bit of grumbling when I give you the homework and say you have to do all these techniques and but you'll come out on the other side having wrestled with it far better off. All right? Now that was thing number one. Now we have most important thing number two. Can you have two most important things? Is that grammatically legal? I mean, isn't a superlative a superlative? Nevertheless, most important thing number two. Don't teach this to your students the way I am going to teach it to you. I am going to teach this very badly. I am going to dump all the dress-ups on you in one session and make you do them all. And in the very next session, I'm going to dump all the sentence openers and make you do all the dress-ups and sentence openers. In the next session, I'm going to dump all the rest of it on you and make you do everything in a very short period of time. And if you do this to your children, you will fry their brains. You will disturb the student's psyche. Do not do that. I'm going to explain with perfect clarity, as best I can, how to teach the stylistic techniques over a long period of time, and then I'm going to proceed to do it very badly in the opposite way. So that means you have to do what I say, but don't do what I do. And that's hard because we learn most by what we do. And so it's easy for people to get a little confused and think, okay, well, we did Unit 1 and 2, and then we did all the dress-ups, and then we did Unit 3, so I guess I can't do Unit 3 until I do all the dress-ups. No, no, no. The units are completely not dependent on the style techniques. You can march through these units according to your schedule, and you don't have to teach a single style technique if you don't want to. I mean, that would be possible. They're not integrally or organically connected in any way. You could also go teach all the stylistic techniques and never do a single one of these units. Now, we obviously think they go together very nicely because it's blended structure and style. That's the title of Dr. Webster's original book, Blended Structure and Style. But it's really important you get the idea that they're not dependent on each other, right? You can do this without doing dress-ups or openers or decorations. So the way we're going to do it through the seminar is we're going to space it out a little bit, but we have to accomplish this whole thing in a very short period of time. So I'm forced by logistics, and I'm dependent upon your patience and perseverance as adult learners to teach this too fast, to teach it wrongly. It would be better if we could just get together once a week for the next 3 months and stretch it out. That would be better, but we can't. So, you got it? All right, so what was important thing number 1? Tell me back. All right, not the formula for good writing. We're training the writer in skills. Number 2, important thing? Don't teach it the way I'm going to teach you. All right, you got those? Okay. That being said, let me try to explain how to teach the stylistic techniques over a long period of time. The basic approach is this. Once you have some keyword outlines and kids can put letters, put sentences on paper, and for most of you, your students will be doing that very quickly, you can begin to introduce the techniques. I would say that almost always I start with the dress-ups. The term dress-up seems to make a lot of sense to kids, and one of the little dialogues I will run with them is I'll say, you can change your clothes for various purposes. You can wear play clothes, jeans and t-shirt. You can put on a costume for a costume party. You can wear a suit or a beautiful dress to look more professional or more fancy. So the idea is you can change your clothes for a purpose. You can also change the way you write for a purpose. So if you're just writing a note to your mom, "Mom, can I go play now?" then you're probably jeans and t-shirt style. Or if you're writing a letter to a friend or a note to a friend, you might do something silly or goofy. You could do that. But if you want to write to an important person, right, the owner of the business you want to work for or the governor of your state, well, then you'd want to look or sound as professional as possible. So that idea of dressing up the writing seems to fit very nicely with the idea of writing style as well. So you're going to introduce one technique. Okay? I usually, almost always, I start with the ly adverb. That's the first one I do because it seems to be the easiest one Kids can relate to adverbs very easily. Adverbs are very flexible. They can go in different parts of the sentence more easily than any other part of speech. And they enhance motion, and children, most children, boys in particular, are very motion-based creatures. So they relate to that very quickly and easily, even at a young age. 5 or 6 years old, kids can relate to ly adverbs. And so you say, okay, now, when you write this fable, when you write this little article, when you write this composition, you have to have in there somewhere this thing, this ly adverb. And then I will give them a nice long list of adverbs to choose from, so they're not limited to what they carry around in their mind. They can scan the list and see some better words. But you're not finished till you put one in. It's a requirement. It becomes the first item on the checklist. So, name, date, title, ly adverb. Now, I will require them to do that technique, putting in that ly adverb, in every paragraph of every composition until it becomes easy. Now, what is the definition of easy? Here's mine. Easy is you can do it without much help and it doesn't sound too goofy most of the time. Okay? So without much help, not too goofy most of the time. When that has become easy, then you add the next technique. So most often I will add the who which clause next. That's a grammatical structure. It's an adjective clause. They don't have to know that, but they do have to know that you use who or which to add information or connect ideas. So now they're going to have the ly and the who which. And they do those two techniques in every paragraph they write until it becomes easy. What was the definition of easy? Not much help and not too goofy most of the time. When that has become easy, then I add the third technique. Don't stop doing the first two, add the third. And you go with 3 of those in every paragraph until it has become easy. And then you add the 4th and do that until it has become, and then the 5th, and so on. And so gradually, over a period of weeks or months or years, depending on the age and aptitude of your students, they should reach a point where they can do everything on the checklist, 11, 12 things, in every paragraph they write. And if you've taught it properly, it should be pretty easy. So, remember this formula. Easy plus 1. That only works if you're not Canadian. Because if you're Canadian, you'd say EZ plus 1. But we're talking about making it easy. And this is really the trick to it. And what's really wonderful is that you do not have to worry about not getting there. You've got plenty of time. You've got years to get to the full checklist if that's what it takes. It would be far better to go a bit too slow and have the kids saying, okay, we know this, what's the next thing? Than to go too fast. And if your students ever say, oh, this checklist is so hard, do I have to do everything? Then what they're really saying is, teacher, you taught me too much, too fast. They're overwhelmed. But if you follow the easy plus 1 formula, they can't ever get overwhelmed because they're only doing what's easy and then one new thing to practice on. Does that all make good sense? Someone asked me about how I came to do this teaching of this writing system. And I mentioned that I had met these Canadians and gone up to this seminar with Dr. Webster and seen the whole system he had laid out. And the thing that struck me so powerfully was this is a Suzuki method for teaching English composition. See, that's all I knew. That's all I knew was Suzuki method. And there are several distinctives of Suzuki method. One of them is the right environment. You saturate the environment with what you want children to learn. So you want them to play music? Saturate their world with the music you want them to play. That made a lot of sense because up in Grouard, all the walls were plastered with everything. It was very, very multi-sensory. Second thing is starting at the earliest period. You know, Suzuki started students on little tiny kids, on little tiny violins. And now we see it's normal for children 6, 7, 8, 9 years old to be playing what 100 years ago would be considered university level repertoire because of the power of the absorbent mind and how quickly young children develop skills and nuance of expression. The third thing about Suzuki method was he realized you've got to get moms involved because you can't take a 5-year-old to a violin lesson and expect them to go remember everything and practice at home. You have to teach the parent to teach the child. But the one that struck out at me was the right method. See, Suzuki understood the means by which children acquire language. And it's very much the easy +1 approach. Think about it. You've got your child is born, right? They come out of the chute and they make a lot of noise for about a year or so. And then right around when they take their first step, they're likely to say their first word. Do you remember your first child's first word? Mama. She said mama. She said mama. Did you hear that? She said mama. You're so excited. And then she uses that word constantly, incessantly, continuously, for everything until you start to wonder, is this child ever going to get another word? But then one day it happens, you hear the next clear, distinct word. In my case, I hoped it would be Dada, but it was Coco, the dog who lived next door. Anyway, then the child uses these 2 words continuously, incessantly, for everything they want. And then one day you hear a 3rd word, and then pretty soon a 4th word. And they keep using all these words, and then they start to acquire more words faster and faster and faster, so that by the age of 3 or 4, they're coming so fast you can't even log them into a book. And by the age of 6, a child does what no other person or computer on earth can ever do, and that is speak a language easily, fluently, effortlessly, right? Now, we only see the brilliance of that when we juxtapose it against the way you or I might go about trying to learn something. Thelma, do you speak Korean?
No, I don't.
No, I don't either. All right. Let's say, hypothetically, that Thelma and I need to learn Korean, just for some reason. And we realized that if we could study partner, we'd be better off than if we're kind of on our own. We don't really know anyone who speaks Korean to teach us, so we're going to get books and tapes and try to learn Korean. And we're very professional, goal-oriented types, so we set goals and say, okay, first week we're going to learn 50 words in Korean. So we go home, we study, we get to Starbucks on Thursday afternoon and we test each other, right? And we say, yes, we've learned 50 words in Korean, let's go learn 50 more. So we go learn 50 more, but we don't have a chance to practice and use those first 50, right? Now we think we've learned 100 words in Korean, but how many do we probably really only know? About the 50 we did. And then we say, aha, let's go learn 50 more. And we learn those, but we don't have a chance to practice and use the first 100. We could continue this system for 20 years. And at any given moment in time, about how many words would we know? About 50. Our ability to use all the words would be nil, right? That's kind of the way we go about learning things. And it's not nearly as effective because we don't have that cumulative nature, right? In fact, we've kind of institutionalized it in some ways. I mean, how many of you took a class at college and were pretty sure you were never going to remember anything about this class after the final, right? I mean, we kind of institutionalized non-learning to some degree. And then anything that you did need, you had to reuse it and build on it and became cumulative. So I looked at this and I said, this is like the Suzuki repertoire. The kids play the piece and then they play another piece, but they keep playing the piece they knew, and then they learn the next piece, and they keep playing the pieces they've learned. They keep playing every piece they've ever learned, and they never lose ability, and then their ability to learn goes up much more rapidly, and they have this repertoire of music and musical ideas and musical language. So I saw that, and I said, this is it. I mean, this is the structure and style is the Suzuki approach to teaching English composition in a technical way. So it fit my personality. And I came back and I taught in the school I was working in and got great results. I went back the next year and got more great results and went back the next year. They said, if you're going to keep coming up here, we're going to put you to work. So I joined the staff of the Blended Sound Site team and went up, I think every year for 7 or 8 years, I went up to Canada. So let's jump in and just go over these dress-ups. They're pretty straightforward. There's the posters. I kind of like the idea of having a poster, although I also kind of like the idea of adding to the poster only the new technique as you add it. So if you're making your own poster, you can easily do that. Just start with a blank poster board and put the first one up, and when you teach the next one, add that. When you teach the next one, add that. If that sounds like too much work for you, we print posters and you can buy them and they look nice. Ooh, I just got a great idea. You could tape over the poster, because it's laminated, right? You could tape over the poster and block out all the techniques, and then when you teach the next one, change your tape position, and you could gradually add to it. See? That's the best of both worlds. You get the proper methodology, and you buy the posters. All right. Officially, honestly, there's no order in which you need to teach the dress-ups. I almost always do the dress-ups before the sentence openers because it addresses the immediate need to understand most of the parts of speech. So it's just good from a grammar development perspective. The ly adverb tends to be the easiest one, so I introduce that first. And what is so helpful with a list of words is that children expand their capability. They expand their potential. If you peek back at page 175 and 176, you will see a couple lists of adverbs. Now, I really don't think that it is a good idea to just, put this whole list on the wall or print it out and throw it at a kid and say, here's a bunch of words. More ideally, you would build the list of words with each assignment and gradually add to your list over time. And I'll show you how we do that when we get to the practicum sessions later on. But there's a list that you have, and one of the things I've noticed about list of words is that they are both temporary and permanent brain expanders. See, if a child is writing something and he sees on his checklist, ooh, I have to have an ly adverb, then he goes and looks at the list of ly adverbs, right? He'll see a word that he might not be able to think of, but he says, ooh, that's the perfect one, ravenously, right? And the word will kind of hop off the list through his eyeballs, into his brain, and out his finger, and he will be able to write a word he would not have been able to think of, thereby sounding smarter than he actually is, which is something I'm constantly trying to do. Although, that's just the appearance of it. What's really happening is much deeper. Think for a moment. If words hop off a list through a brain and into a paper a few times, what's going to happen? Yes, that word will move from a passive vocabulary, i.e. can recognize it, to an active vocabulary, i.e. I know how to use this word, right? Now, there is a little bit of danger of kids just picking any old word and maybe it's not appropriate and it's awkward, right? And there are some strategies that we can use to fight that phenomenon. But I like to point out the relationship, again, between music and writing. They're both skills. They're both learned by modeling imitation. You have to do them to learn them, right? And there's awkwardness, right? If, Aaron, if you came to me and said, I would like you to teach me the violin, and I said, sure, I'd be happy to, would I expect every note you play to be perfectly in tune the first time you try? Or every bowing to be perfectly fluid? Or every, slur to be no, I would expect wrong notes, out of tune, awkward bowings, right? Awkwardness would be normal for learning to play a musical instrument, right? But through that process of modeling, imitation, coaching, modeling, imitation, coaching, over a period of time, you would be able to reduce that awkwardness and have in tune, nice notes, articulate bowing, good dynamics, all that stuff. Of course, then when I introduce a new technique, oh, now we have to learn to play in third position. Okay, there's a new period of awkwardness, do you see? So that's why the easy +1 is so valuable, because we don't want to force too much new awkward things until what has been learned and practiced is more natural, not too goofy. And the other thing I always point out, especially when teachers or parents will say, oh boy, this child's writing is kind of awkward. Well, they're children. They're naturally awkward. Everything about them is awkward. Part of growing up is just becoming less awkward. Some people succeed more than others. So don't be afraid of that awkwardness. Children are experimenting. They're playing with words. How do you play with something? You see how it works. You try to put it together and see if it does something, right? And so children will experiment with language the same way they'll experiment with any type of toy or tool. And so just take that all in stride and don't be afraid of the awkwardness. Now, let's, so the LI adverb list, get those words up in front of the kids, on the wall, in a notebook. Build the word list together with them as you go through the stories. Once that is easy, then you can add the who or which clause. The who or which clause, and you see the samples here, we generally use who about people. Tom, who usually loved pizza, chose soup. Which about things, or animals if they're being animals. The spider which terrified Miss Muffet quietly spun a web. Sometimes there's a little bit of a gray area. It'd be hard to say the chimpanzee mother which, because you feel like it's too close to being human, the chimpanzee mother who. And then sometimes people get confused about governments, and they'll say the government who, even though it's more of a thing. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but that's a general guideline. This creates, just so you know, a subordinate adjective clause, because it tells more, it describes a noun. You don't really have to know that to do it, you just have to use the word who or which. The only exception would be if you put the who or which at the front of the sentence. That wouldn't be creating a clause. What would it be creating? A question. So that would be different. So we want to try and get that. And you'll find that children who are read to more when they're young and children who read more are going to take to some of these techniques a little more naturally than children who haven't been read to, because they're going to be more dependent on their colloquial database, their day-to-day conversation. That's why it's just so very important. If you want children to grow up and be good writers, the most important thing you can do is read to them out loud in huge quantity all through their developmental years, into their teenage years. That's what builds the language database. That's what builds the vocabulary and syntax that are going to allow them to speak and write well later on. I have a whole long 90-minute talk on that called Nurturing Competent Communicators. I hope if you haven't listened to it, you will. It's, I think, kind of the most important stuff I know. So this may be a little bit awkward, but you work with it. It's also a case where you can show students that you can combine a couple ideas, right? So if you said book lice, which are insects that eat mold, crawl around on bookshelves, floors, and windowsills looking for moist spots. You could actually combine those two using a clause. You may hear creaking or tapping noises, which makes the library come alive, right? So you might combine a couple of your facts using that clausal connector. A lot of kids will use and. Any of you have students that kind of overuse and? They'll just start writing blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and then, and so, and then, and so. And of course, you're kind of wanting to say, don't do that. Of course, the poor kids are thinking, how can I not do that? That is the way it is coming out of my brain. You know, so we tend to, rather than say don't do that, focus more on do this. So here's an alternative way to connect ideas. The third dress-up technique, the strong verb, this is a very good one to have because in order to do it, you have to know what a verb is. I often will discover that children I teach have done 3 or 4 years of blah, blah grammar workbook or blah, blah language arts workbook, come to my class and still not be able to find the verb in their own sentence. And it's very fuzzy, too, for a child in English. English is possibly the worst possible language to use to teach grammar because it's not inflected well. Words don't change the way they're used. Have you noticed that? In English, take, for example, the word golf. Golf could be a verb. Golf could be a noun. Golf could be an adjective, right? I golf. Golf is fun. Get in the golf cart. And you would never know just by looking at it. Whereas most normal languages, like Latin or Japanese, you can look at the word and say, that's a verb, has to be a verb, couldn't be anything but a verb because it's verbish, has verb endings, right? We don't have that so easily in English. So learning parts of speech in English is one of the hardest languages to do it, which is why I recommend, if you really want to study grammar, study a foreign language. You meet kids who know stuff. I met a student once, and he said, I know what that is. I said, what is it? Infinitive. I said, where'd you learn that? He said, from French. Right? I mean, adults who say, I never understood English grammar till I took German in college. That's when it actually made sense. But we want the children to understand their parts of speech, so you put a strong verb on the dress-up checklist, and suddenly they have to know 2 things. What is a verb, and is this a good one? Does it give a strong image or feeling? And one of the things I discovered was that kids will have a little bit of difficulty between verbs and adjectives. In fact, that's one of the most common questions in a class if I'm teaching. They'll raise a hand. They'll point to a word. I know this is a good word, but is it a strong verb or a quality adjective, right? And so I wanted to create a little test whereby they could kind of figure that out on their own, a little template. So if you can put a word right here, he blanked, or he blanks, right? If you can put a word right there, you've got a verb 90-some% of the time. If you can't put it there and get a complete sentence, you probably don't have a verb. Same thing with the quality adjective, the blank pen. If you can put a word in there and it makes grammatical sense, you've got an adjective. If you can't, you probably don't, right? So a kid will write a word like, remarkable. And he'll underline it, and then he'll have to figure out, is this a strong verb or quality adjective? Well, he doesn't have to ask me, just do the test. Yesterday, he remarkable. Nope. Today, he remarkable. Tomorrow, nope. The remarkable, remarkable. Okay, now I know what it is. Do you see? So that was very helpful to me when I discovered that little template where the kids could test their word. And I'd say, it works 80-90% of the time. We do have some confusing cases in our language. Now, again, the strong verb, strong would be, we want a strong verb that gives a strong image or feeling. And the easiest way to teach this is to point out some kind of weak, lame, lousy verbs that don't give a good image or feeling. Can you think of any kind of blah words? Go or went. Nice, that's not a verb, but it's weak, lame, lousy. Yeah. Walk. Said. Yeah. What we do is we look at these as possibly being banned words, making them illegal, so that students don't use them. If you flip over to page 178, 179, you'll kind of see some word lists that we have built up over time that give you options too. Seesaw, think thought, like. There's about 500 you could come up with substitutes for said. And so what we'll do here is usually start a banned words list, say you're not allowed to use this one, but here's a bunch of options. And when you use one of these, it becomes your strong verb, you see? And that works very nicely, and then you can gradually build those lists over time. And you want to help children learn to use a thesaurus. Now, you used to have to buy books and open them up and know the alphabet. Now, technology has successfully atrophied that skill, and all you need now is a pad or a pod or a tablet of some sort, and you can have ready access to thesauruses. We have put together a book called A Word Right Now, which is, I think, even better than a regular thesaurus because it's organized in a by character quality, so that all the words connected with, say, courage would be organized and divided into parts of speech. So you can take a look at that. And in order to keep up with technology, we've made that book into an app. So now you can get IEW Writing Tools app, and you can have a huge list of great ly adverbs, great strong verbs, and great quality adjectives available at your fingertips for your kids. And you might find it useful too in your own writing if you do any of that. So strong verb, quality adjective, using the template to test, using the banned words list there. Now you'll see that we have put in between the strong verb and quality adjective the because clause. And this one is interesting because I would be the first to admit that it can sound a little forced or contrived. It is, though, on the other hand, a word that we use very, very often. And I had an interesting experience. I think it was the third time I taught this seminar many, many years ago. I had a second grade teacher in the class, and when I said the because dress up, she popped up her hand, and I said yes. And she said, I would never teach my students to use the word because. And I was not nearly as cocky then as I am now, and I thought, ooh, what's wrong? What am I doing wrong here? Because Webster did it, so I said, why not? And she said, because they do it anyway. And I thought about that for a while, and I realized, actually, that's a good reason to put it on a checklist. Because if you do it anyway, it's easy, right? So it's a small step from the third dress up to the fourth if it's a word that you're used to using all the time. And then you can get another check mark on your checklist, and you can get that good feeling that happens when you put check marks on a checklist. You know the day planner people? That developed that whole day planner originally? They did scientific research to show that when you put a check mark on a checklist, it causes a release of endorphins in the brain. You do something that is not on your checklist. You write it in, you check it off, you end up throwing the whole thing away. You didn't really need to write it in and check it off, but you need the endorphins to get through the day. The last of the dress-ups here is the clausal dress-up. These are technically called subordinating conjunctions. But what we did is just come up with this list of 7. That's a good starter list there. And have the kids memorize it. When, while, where, as, since, if, although. And if you put their initials in order, you get a little mnemonic device, www.asia. And the kids like that one. And it's if you go to asia.com, it's a travel website, so it's safe. Now, one thing I learned from Mrs. Ingham was this marvelous idea of the door test. When you want kids to memorize something that's going to be useful and they need to know, you can do what she did, which is give them the memorizing of it as a password to get into the classroom, right? So every time she would send them out to recess or to lunch or at the end of the day, she would say, okay, the password to get back in is whatever, you know, the capital of British Columbia is Victoria, or, you know, 6 times 7 is 42, you know, anything you want kids to memorize. So I do this with this list of words and say, when you come in tomorrow, we're going to line up, and to get into the class, you have to say when, while, where, as, since, if, although, in 3 seconds or less from memory, right? So then they practice and they memorize it, and then they have those words on the tip of their brain, the tip of their tongue, and they're available, and they can use it, you see? Mrs. Ingham tells the funny story, though. One time she had the children all lined up at the end of the day and said, okay, children, class is finished, you may leave. Nobody left. And she said, you can go now. And nobody moved. And she said, is something wrong? And one little boy said, well, Mrs. Ingham, you didn't give us the password. And if we don't know the password, we can't come to class tomorrow. The pure heart of the first grader. Now, in the homeschool, it's kind of the opposite. The password to get out. All right. So those are the 6 dress-ups, and you should, of course, teach them to your students all in 1/2 hour like I just did to you, correct? No. Okay. What's the formula? EZ plus 1. So you may end up, depending where you are, teaching, 2 dress-ups in Unit 1 and 2, and then going right on to Unit 3 and adding 1 or 2 dress-ups, and going right on to Unit 4, adding a dress-up. You might stretch out all 6 of these dress-ups over 4 or 5 units or more. Or maybe if you've got older kids or high school kids or experienced kids, you might shrink that down, right? But the thing you don't want to do is what we're doing, which is to learn them all at once and then have to go do them all the first time. Now, we're going to do this together, and if you will turn to page 2223, you will see a checklist that we can use, and our goal is going to be to write into a paragraph here the facts about book lice that we have in our keyword outline, using all 6 of the dress-up techniques that we have learned. Now remember, this is not the way you do it with your students. You will introduce 1 or 2 till it's easy and add 1. But we're on the fast track here, so we want to see if we can make it work all at once. So I like to put a little checklist on the corner of the paper. We have printed up ones, but I like the kids to kind of get used to writing their own checklist on as well. So tell me what we need here, and I'll make it. L-Y. Who, which. Strong verb. Because clause, quality adjective, and when, while, where, as, since, if, although. Got to memorize that. Okay. So we'll start over here. Class. Book lice. Try to set it up the way it is in the checklist there. And someone needs to start us out here with an with a sentence, something about book lice, insects, heat, and mold. Anyone? Simple. Just start.
Book lice are insects that eat mold.
There you go. Okay, we're off and running. Book lice are insects that eat mold. Okay. Do we have any dress-ups? Doesn't look like it. All right, no problem. We'll see some chance to do that. Crawl bookshelves moist. And wasn't it they were looking for the moist places where there was more mold, something like that? So who could help us out with a sentence there? Yes?
They crawl along bookshelves looking for moist places where nasty mold grows.
They crawl along bookshelves looking for moist places. Well, now, is it nasty to them? It's nasty to us because we don't like having to clean it. It would be nasty to the librarians, that's for sure. Yeah, it'd be tasty for the book lice, right? You could do either one, really. Where? Okay, we got to decide. Do we want nasty or tasty? Tasty? Okay. Tasty. We'll just write from the book louse's perspective here. Mold grows. All right. Now, do we have any dress-ups? Where. Okay. We've got where. So we can underline that. That's the indicator. And then we'll check it off.
Tasty.
Tasty. Quality adjective. Okay. We'll underline that one and check it off. And I strongly recommend that you do have the children underline the dress-up techniques because that will really help them and it'll help you. But only one of each. So you can have, as many LYs or quality adjectives or whatever that you want, but just underline one of each. And then what'll happen is the kids will say, I'm finished. And you can come over and just look at the underlines. 1, 2, 3. I only see 3 underlines, but there's 4 things on your checklist. You must not be finished. And that forces them to do something very radical in their world, which is what? Read what they wrote. And they have to read through. Maybe they had the dress up, but they forgot to underline it. Maybe they didn't have that dress up, so now they need to figure out some way to fit it in and do a little revising or editing on their own. So the indicator system is very helpful for both the student and the teacher. And besides, think of this. You've been at this a while, and you're writing 3-paragraph composition with 4 or 5 dress-ups in each paragraph, and you've got a whole classroom full of papers, 25 papers to look at. You want to go find all that stuff? No way. It would destroy your life. You want to be able to see very quickly. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good, they've got it. Or, something's missing. You see? So, highly recommend the indicator system. Of course, we like the checklist because of the endorphins. So, both are good. All right, let's move on. Less than 2 millimeters? What could we do here? Yes?
Booklets are extremely tiny, measuring less than 2 millimeters.
Ooh, nice one. Okay. Book lice are extremely, could we put small? Would that be okay? Small, measuring less than 2 millimeters. Great. Do we have any dress up to mark?
LY.
LY. Good. So underline and check it off. Okay, something about look, listen to. And I'll just remind you that it is perfectly okay to combine some of these ideas into one sentence. We have clausal connectors to use. And so if you thought, we could fit these together somehow, you're perfectly okay to do that. So, what do you like? Maureen?
I was going to say, can we count measuring as a verb?
No, because we'll get into this later, but there's kind of a grammar thing about words that get INGs on them, and they actually change from being kind of pure verbs to being verbals. And then there's a lot of debate about what verbals are. So this is probably a participle. And so I'm going to stick with verbs are verbs and they're not kind of verbish. Good enough? Yeah. So we'll find another strong verb though, I'm sure. And we can go change one if we need to later. Okay, let's move on. Look, listen to. You want to combine those? All right. How might that work? Anybody? Yes, Aaron?
Don't just look for book lice, listen for them too, because the female may be making a clicking sound to attract her mate.
Oh, I like that. Nice one. Okay. Don't just look for book lice, but listen to, because the female, help me here and say it again.
May be making a clicking sound to attract her mate.
May be making a clicking sound to attract a mate. Okay, good. And we kind of dropped that abdomen paper business. Is that okay? Yeah, we don't know. There's no rule that says we have to tell every last little detail about book lice, right? Makes a clicking sound. That's the fact. And it kind of would be cumbersome to belabor the point, it seems. Do we have any dress up there?
Because.
Okay, because. So we've got that one, and we're doing pretty well here. We're looking for a chance to do a who, which, or a strong verb, or a strong verb somewhere. And if we get to the end and we haven't done it, we'll go back and edit, make it happen. But let's see what's next. Hear creaking noises, not imagining. What was that all about? Remember?
If you hear creaking in the library, you may not be imagining it.
Okay. If you... Can I put so in front of that just for fun? So, if you hear. So, if you hear creaking
In the library.
noises.
Noises,
So
yeah.
we had noises in the library. You are not imagining things. Period. Continue on. Okay. Last sentence. It may be alive with. Can I add in one more quality adjective here? Would that be okay? Amorous. Book lice. Then you can change the title to Lousy Love. And it will repeat or reflect. This is something that we teach the students, that the last sentence is a source of words for the title. So try and have them wait on creating a title until they have created the last sentence, and we'll see a few examples of that in a minute. We do have a little more work to do here, though, because we're dragging. We need a who, which.
Could we change book lice, who are extremely small, measure less than 2 millimeters?
That would do it. I would suggest that we go with which instead of who, because we normally would use who for people and which for things. Now, if we were writing about Benny the Book Louse and his romantic adventures in the Brooklyn Library, we'd go with the who. But in this case, let's do it that way. Book lice, which are extremely small, measure less than 2 millimeters. So then we can underline that and that. And I'm not saying, and I don't want you to think that that is necessarily better than the way it was, but what we're doing is we're trying to learn how to make these things work. And when we do that, we see, there's some options here. And that's what we want children to do, is expand their repertoire of options. Now, Maureen, since we've unverbaled this, and it's back to a verb, is it strong enough? Yep, okay, so we'll just claim that one, and boom, we got it. Good, very nice. Well done, everybody. Good. Okay, there are a few student samples here where you will see this title-final sentence relationship. A nice example is on page 24, where you have this little article by Angie called Black and White Stink Bomb. It's all about skunks. And her last sentence is, these black and white stink bombs are truly remarkable, right? So we've got that there. Another example across the page there, United in Time. This is about the standardization of time at a certain point in history. And then the last sentence, the country was now truly united in land and time. So this is almost kind of a foreshadowing, a precursor to the topic sentence, clincher sentence idea that we will be teaching in Unit 4. But we're just saying now, have your title repeat or reflect, but repeat works a little better usually, one or two words from the last sentence. And this helps kids get better titles too, so it works quite well. We're now going to give you a chance to try this yourself with the Unit 1 and 2 practicum session. So turn to page 26, and you will see that there is an article called Infrasound and Elephants. And this article is approximately the same length as the book lice article. There's a space on page 27 for you to write your outline. So I'm going to read it through once out loud with you, and then you're going to be on your own to create a keyword outline, much like we did here. Just remember that you're limited to 3 words per sentence. Symbols, numbers, and abbreviations are free. Okay? All right, here we go. Infrasound and elephants. In 1984, Katie Payne first realized that elephants communicated with infrasound, sound below the level of human hearing. Her observations sparked research into infrasonic elephant communication. Humans' hearing stops at 20 hertz, a frequency about 4 steps down from the lowest note on a standard piano. Because elephant vocal cords are so large, they can emit sounds from 1 to 20 hertz. Elephants use these calls, also called rumblings, to communicate with each other over long distances. Under the right atmospheric conditions, elephant calls can be heard 6 miles away. They use them to call for help, warn of danger, or find a mate. This long-distance communication may also help ensure that elephant herds space themselves far enough apart to provide adequate vegetation for the herd's needs. Just remember that you're limited to 3 words per sentence. Symbols, numbers, and abbreviations are free. Okay? Once you've got your outline finished, then you should raise your hand, look around for someone else who's also finished, and go with that person somewhere else in the room or sit next to each other. And I want you to practice telling back the content from the keywords. You may not need to do this for your own comprehension, but I think you'll understand the value of it by actually doing it. So you talk it through. You talk through your outline to your partner listens, and then you switch and you listen to your partner. They will talk through their outline. If you want a special challenge, you can try it the public speaking way, where you look at the keywords, think what you're going to say, and then look up at your partner's smiling face and say the sentence you thought of. But if that's too stressful, then don't worry. Just talk it through. Try to make sense of it. Once you've talked it through both ways, come back to your seat And on page 28 is a checklist, and there's some space on page 29 for you to write out the paragraph on infrasound and elephants using this checklist. So that's the practicum session. You're pretty much on your own. I like to kind of walk around the room and look over people's shoulder and be sure they're doing what I think they should be doing. If that causes you to be nervous or uncomfortable in any way, just give me an evil look and I will leave your area and never come back, and you will be perfectly safe. If you have any question in the process, just wave me down and I'll be available to you. And we'll work on this for a little bit, and then we'll call time, make some observations, and then dive into Unit 3. All right? Hopefully you've finished. If not, don't stress. Some people finish faster than others, but I would like to ask you to stop and let's make a couple observations. How many of you found this to be a little bit more challenging than you thought? Good. Yes, it gives you a bit of empathy for your students. I purposely wanted something that was perhaps unfamiliar to you, and I would argue that almost everything is as unfamiliar to your students as this is to you. So it gives you a little bit of empathy. How many of you found that talking it through was actually very helpful in clarifying your understanding and preparing you for writing? So don't skip that talking it through part, because it's just very valuable. How many of you are now acutely aware of why you should not make your students do 6 dress-ups in the first assignment that you give them? Because I bet some of you are thinking, oh, this is just too much to think about these weird facts and keywords, and oh, now I have all these dress-ups, right? If I had said just put in one ly word somewhere, that would have been a different feeling, wouldn't it have? So just remember that you want to put those dress-ups in according to the formula, what's easy plus one thing. And, even with high school student, I would prefer to start with 1 or 2 things and build up from there than dump the whole lot on too quickly. And I guess lastly, how many of you kind of felt this was almost like a game, almost like a puzzle? If you're still writing right now, you're definitely in that category, because you're thinking, I am not going to finish until I win, until I get all the pieces. And I would argue that there's probably only 3 ways to teach anything to anyone, get people to learn and do stuff. One is to find or somehow make something interesting, intrinsically interesting, and then people can learn that pretty easily. Another way to go about it is say, learn this or suffer a punishment. That tends to be the least effective because the fear of the suffering impedes the learning. And while you can get the appearance of having learned something, if there isn't real relevance, it dissipates very quickly. The third thing is to make it into a game, right? And I think for some kids, you're going to find that having the keyword outline, having the checklist, these are like the little pieces, the Lego pieces. Okay, now we put them together, and when we get it finished, we have that satisfaction. So this game element, I think you'll find really works well for some kids. So now, any questions up through this part? The practicum experience you had, any question there? Anything about the stylistic techniques, the dress-ups so far that we've talked about? Denise is there with the microphone. Yes, right there.
Because I was only allowed to use 3 words, and I did use some signals or some, number symbols, I found it difficult to keep track of all of the details. Mm-hmm. And so when I wrote mine, then I went back and compared it to the original. Am I supposed to go back and compare it with the kids to the original? And should I correct them if they've left out details?
Well, there's not a categorical answer to that, because it all depends on the circumstance. So is there anything wrong with comparing yours with the original? Absolutely not. Some kids kind of are scrupulous in that they'll feel really bad if they miss something. But we kind of need to break them of that habit, because when we get to Unit 4, we're not only going to have sentences like this, we're going to have way too many of them, and we're going to have to intentionally start not including all those details. However, as a teacher, you might feel like, oh wow, that's kind of a really key thing that was missed. Let's reread it. Doesn't that seem a bit important? Okay, let's put that in. But I would say there's no fault at looking back, but on the other hand, there's no rule that says you've got to get every last little detail in there, because we're starting the process of limiting and summarizing. Good? All right. Another one. Yes, right there.
On the checklist, you mentioned that every paragraph must contain at least one element. Can your paper contain too many elements of dress-ups?
I suppose it is possible that you could go crazy with dress-ups. Young children, once they get a new toy, will tend to play with it a lot, and just to learn it and get familiar with it. So I tend to be very hands-off on that, always reminding myself it's process, not product, that I'm concerned about. And so I don't really care very much about the final paper. What I care is, are they learning something while they're doing it? So if you show a kid a new thing and give him a list of ly words and he wants to put 2 ly words in every sentence, that's going to perhaps make the prose awkward from an objective point of view. But wow, he's really learning his list of words and playing with it, you see? So yes, you could have too many dress-ups, but would I worry about it? Probably not, because that toy will take its place on the shelf with the others, and it will be used more naturally as maturity increases. I would point out, though, the minimum rule for dress-ups is each one in every paragraph. So each one that you've learned in each paragraph, and that's what you mark. And you don't want to underline more than however many things on the checklist. That's the key. So you can have 12 ly words, doesn't bother me, but please don't underline them all. And then that would be worse than none, probably. Good. Any other questions? Yes, Erin, right here.
If you're in a classroom or a co-op setting where the levels of the children you have are all over the place, what's your advice to dealing with the easy plus one concept? And in addition to that, when you're starting over another year, and do you start from the beginning and go through everything once again throughout the year? How would you advise handling that?
Oh, 2 great questions. Thank you very much, Erin. Very good questions. The first question is, what do you do with a mixed group? And typically, a homeschool type of class or hybrid class will have multiple grade levels. Although those of you who teach in age-segregated grades are well aware that even if everyone was born on the same day, just because there's the same age, there's not going to be a uniformity there. There's going to be a variety. In Gruard, they kind of euphemistically used to call it the birdies and the grunters. And how do you deal with that? It's a good question. The quick answer, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more later, but the basic answer is you customize the checklist for subgroups of students. So you've got, your kind of, high end over here, right? And you come over and you say, okay, now you guys know what's going on. This is maybe getting a little boring. So I'm going to show you the next technique on the checklist, and you put it on your checklist, and you do it, but I'm not going to tell everybody because they're not ready, but you guys are chomping at the bit, so they'll be very excited, right? So you take your top little group and show them something to do, and then that's particularly nice because if you read their papers or they read their papers, they're foreshadowing the next thing that everybody else is going to have to do eventually, right? But you can also do the opposite. You can go over to your low end here and say, all right, I see you guys are really kind of burdened by this checklist, and so what I'd like you to do is just cross this thing off the checklist and don't worry about it. Just do these 3 things, don't worry about this 4th one, and you won't be penalized for that. I just want you to cross out. Is that okay? Usually they're like, oh, thank you, because kids know where they're at, and they know if they're overwhelmed and stressed, they know if they're bored and need more. So you can actually kind of layer or level the groups, subgroups within one group. It's more work for the teacher, right? Because then you've got to keep track of that and remember that, those 3 have the extra thing on the checklist and those 4 have the less thing on the checklist, and he's not even got a checklist yet, and the rest of them are in the middle. That's more work. But you did not sign up to be a teacher so that you would not work, right? If you wanted to not work, you would have got a different job. Now, the second question, refresh me on that?
When you start over.
Right, okay. The second question pertaining to what to do when you have students that have been through 1 or more years of the syllabus. And that kind of segues in with the problem of transfer-in students, right? So you've got a group of kids, 70-80% of them have done this for a year or two, and 10, 15, 20% are new to the class, new to the school. That's a real challenge. First thing I would say is assume everybody forgot everything. Right? I mean, it's very safe to assume that kids stop school, they go to summer, they forget everything, they come back in the fall and don't know anything. It's far better to assume that than to assume that they do remember everything. And then what they will do is prove to you that they didn't forget, and that'll be more enjoyable for them. And they'll go, well, we know that. Oh, you do? Fantastic. So many students might have forgot, but I'm glad you didn't. So it starts kind of on a positive approach. And so you would build the checklist more quickly the second year or the third year, but I would still work with that basic principle. What's easy plus 1? So, if you've got a group that got all the way through sentence openers and into decorations at the end of last year, you come back and say, okay, here's your checklist, 3 dress-ups. They're going to be insulted, right? What do you mean 3 dress-ups? We know all this stuff. Well, let's just let you start easy this year. Half of them are going to do everything they remember just to prove it. But it's safer that way. Do you see? Also, I will say this is a strategy I've worked with a few schools and programs that have done this. It's the transfer-in problem. So you've got kids that have done this for a couple years, and then you've got a few that are coming in new, and they've never heard any of the terminology. They don't know much about grammar, right? They're going to be lost. You can do, it takes, again, a little more work, but a writing boot camp in the summer before your classes start. And say, if you want to be in this school, this class, this program, you have to do this. So then, okay, you get 1 week. You're not going to get a year's worth of experience, but at least you get familiar with the terminology and the system, and that saves you a little bit of time. Good questions. Yes, over there.
When you say dress-ups, you'll say 3 dress-ups. Because kids are going to say, well, if they did 2 LY words, so it's just 1 dress-up means 1 specific technique you're talking about?
Yes.
But do teachers sometimes say, I want you to do 3 LY words? That counts.
I have heard of teachers doing that, but I discourage it.
Okay.
I discourage it because what I want is a minimum. That's why we call it the minimum rule. That forces people to practice each of the techniques, forces them to look on those word lists at least once. But I'm not trying to get them to overdo it either. I mean, if they overdo it on their own, that doesn't bother me. But I don't want to start burdening them down with multiple.
So you like to keep a checklist at 1 of each of those things?
Yes, 1 of each, and if you do more, that's your business. It seems to be a good balance. It seems to work very well for me for a long time, and most of our, accredited instructors that are teaching out there have found that minimum rule brings a good balance. Yeah, good question. Maybe one more? Yes, in the back.
In reference to your statement that we cannot help them too much, is it going too far to say, sit down with them and they're struggling with those 3 keywords and putting them into a sentence to two examples of a sentence and say, which one do you like
That's
better?
a great thing to do. Very often, you'll have a child who'll say, well, I don't know what to write, even though you've got the key words, and you'll say, well, can you make a sentence out of these keywords? No. So then I will just say, well, could you write this? Blah, 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 and just dictate a sentence. Okay, I could do that. Okay, write it down. In fact, I was teaching in a demonstration class in the school, and I had that exact thing happen. It was a second grade class, little guy in the front there. He's just not writing anything. So I came over and dictated the first sentence, and he wrote it. I came back, he was not doing anything, so I dictated the second sentence, and he wrote it. When I came back the third time, he had already launched into the third sentence. So it only took a modeling of 2 times for him to get past kind of his default mode, which is, I don't know what to write. And then one of the teachers asked me afterwards, she said, that little boy in the front row? You told him what to write? As if this was a crime. And I said, yes, I did tell him what to write, because if I hadn't told him exactly what to write, he probably would not have written anything. And if he doesn't write something, how's he going to learn to do it? It's kind of common sense, but we have that ingrained fear, like, oh no, if I tell him what to write. The other thing is, if you see a child has written something that's a bit awkward, or maybe they use a word that's just flat out the wrong word, right? Don't ever say, can't you think of a better word? Because their attitude is, no. If I could have thought of a better word, I would have thought of a better word. So if you don't like this word, just tell me what word to put there. And so I would just say, this word doesn't work, here's a better one. And that's modeling, that's teaching. So it's all valid. We just kind of have to get away from our fear in that way. Yeah. Good. Okay, we're going to take a short break, and we will come back and launch into Unit 3.